recently, U.S. Congressman Paul Brown was widely quoted as saying that evolutionary theory of biology and the Big Bang theory of astrophysics are lies straight from the pit of hell because they contradict the Judeo-Christian Bible. Now let's just make a comparison. I want to make a comparison, a cultural comparison here. Pardon? Yes. Let me just want to make a comparison here. So I want to ask you all a question. I think I know the answer, but maybe not. So think about things you have heard members of Vietnam's parliament say, and try to think of the things that they have said that are the most foolish, most ignorant that you possibly can. Have any of you ever heard any member of the Parliament of Vietnam say anything so ignorant and backward? Can you try to think of something?
Maybe something similar.
Not quite as extreme. Okay. Well, I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe you can think of something, but I don't think it's easy to think of something that's this backward and ignorant. But we almost never hear words like ignorant, backward, primitive being used to refer to American society. Such words are normally reserved for countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is what Said, Freire, Fanon, this type of use of language is something they were very much aware of. How about corruption and white-collar crime? The biggest white-collar criminal in world history is an American named Bernie Madoff, who in 2008 was arrested for running the largest Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme ever in history. It apparently, according to estimates, defrauded investors of approximately $50,000 million, $50 billion. That is more than the health budget of most countries in the world. It was stolen, essentially. How about on a more massive scale, not just high finance? Well, in elementary education, in the last few years, so the last 2 or 3 years, there have been a series of scandals involving some of the largest school districts in the United States over falsification of student test scores. Now, the circumstance that's causing this is that a recently adopted policy in many parts of the United States is to base teacher pay and funding level for schools in part on student performance in certain standardized examinations. That's a very controversial policy. Most teachers think it's terrible, but it is widely adopted. Here's a quote from a website on education. As a list of states and cities plagued by allegations of cheating on standardized tests grows from Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Atlanta to include the states of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, it seems like this type of extreme test cheating uncovered in Atlanta public schools earlier this month may be more common than we as a nation want to believe. There have been additional scandals since then. So I want to give a story about ethics. Now, in the United States, as in most countries, there are many, I'm sure there are many cases of high-level corruption that we never learn about, that are never found, never exposed to the public, or never punished. But I want to talk about one that actually did come to light and did result in prison. But I want to start the story about ethics by talking about a mathematician I know through email, Lou Bendit-Rees, at the University of Illinois. During the years from 2004 to 2007, this mathematician, Lou, at that university, refused to take an online ethics test that was required of all Illinois state employees. In the U.S., we often like to prove that we care about ethics by requiring everybody to take a test, and give the right answers to questions about ethics. And it's easy to do now through online testing, so they require all state employees. Not everywhere, it's not in my state, but in Illinois they have this requirement. And he refused to take it. What Lou said was that these ethics tests are a foolish waste of time and they're insulting. to a professor, to make a professor take this test. And he refused for a few years. And eventually he gave in and took the test because under Illinois law, he would have had to pay a $5,000 fine if he continued to refuse. So he took the test. It takes about 10 minutes, so he took the test. Now, the law requiring this test was signed into law by Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich in 2004. And in order to set an example and encourage other state employees to agree to take it, he took it at 5 different times, 5 different versions of the test. He took it. A year ago, Governor Blagojevich was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for corruption. He had already been impeached by then. The most famous instance of this corruption occurred in 2008 in connection with Obama's election as U.S. president. Now, before his election, Obama was a U.S. senator from Illinois. When he left that position to become president, there was a vacancy in the Senate, and it's the job of the state governor under Illinois state law to appoint a replacement to be senator until the next election. That was the job of the governor. Blagojevich asked for bribes from people hoping to be appointed senator in place of Obama. But how often do we hear America described as a society full of corruption? Almost never, because that type of statement that a social system is corrupt or full of corruption is normally made only about countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Okay, so how does one respond to people in Vietnam who have internalized colonial ways of thinking? For example, in 2009, some people sent me some angry email, and I understand that there were a much larger number of people who said angry things in blogs in Vietnamese that I don't know how to read, fortunately. Said very angry things about me, that I was completely ignorant about Vietnam and did not realize that it was a thoroughly corrupt and backward country that can be saved only by intervention from the West, such as the university built by Americans. This was a common point of view among some people during that controversy over the Vallely Report. So how does one respond to that? I think what you can do is educate young people about the history of their country. And in mathematics, I want to talk about, finally conclude with a short list of what young people should know about. And oh, I'm sorry for the dots under that. I'm not good at using PowerPoint or Vietnamese or for anything, and I could not find the letters without accents. So I know that the dots don't belong there for Long Tay Binh, who of course has a memorial stele at FMU that I remember seeing back in 1978 when I first visited FMU. The story of Le Bon Thiem and how he came back from France with his doctorate and proceeded to develop mathematical institutions in Vietnam and taught under the most difficult possible conditions during the French War in a makeshift university near the Chinese border, and then again during the American War in the forests of Hai Nguyen province, working to develop new generations of mathematicians in Vietnam. A really inspiring story. And of course, Professor Hoang Thuy, who did the same to develop Vietnam's institutions. And I like the story of Hoang Thuy's geometry book that was published by the Viet Minh Press during the French War. I know of no other mathematics book that was ever published by a guerrilla press anywhere in the world. And I think the youth of 2013 should learn about the youth of 1954, the time of the partition, the youth in the south of Vietnam, whose teachers left for liberated Vietnam north of the 17th parallel, and how they cherished their copy of Hoang Thuy's geometry book along with To Hu's poems. You know, it's a wonderful story. I think young people should think about that. And the story of Hanoi University and evacuation in Taiwan, the lectures by Grosny, they're lectures at the highest levels of advanced mathematics under the most difficult conceivable conditions of war in a very, very poor country. And I visited that. The people at Taiwan University, along with Huai and his colleague and fellow student in the class of 1967, Lei Wong Time, also a mathematician, he went with me to visit the site of that university. And one thing that we discussed there with the local district leaders and people at Taiwan University, and I talked about again with Deputy Prime Minister Wen Tian-Young at a meeting the same day, is that it would be really nice to have a museum and exhibit showing people, especially young people in Vietnam, but also foreign visitors perhaps, the conditions under which people studied mathematics in those years. And I think it would be really nice if, say, by the time I next come to Vietnam in 2 years, which will also be right before the 50th anniversary of the evacuation, at the end of 2014 when I come, right before the 50th anniversary of the evacuation of Hanoi University to the forest. That would be a nice time to have some exhibits and museum constructed in that area where the math faculty was located and where Prof would be giving his lectures. And finally, of course, the most recent example of the strength of mathematical traditions in Vietnam is the example of the director of this institute, Fields medalist, Professor Bo Lao Chow. And so here's a short list. It's not a complete list, but it's a list of what is important for Vietnamese young people to know about. And I think that in order to combat internalized colonial thinking, the best approach is to draw upon the strength of the cultural and intellectual traditions of Vietnam in many areas, including very prominently mathematics. Thank you.
Please, question or remark, comment? Please.
I have a lot of sympathy for all what you have said. And I mean, it's clear that all the criticism which you have expressed against a number of bad things in the West, I fully share. And I also share your incitation for Vietnamese to be proud of their country. I think Vietnam is surely one of the countries in the world which has most reasons to be proud, in spite of many bad things, of its recent history. It's a fact that if you ask now in the street a young Vietnamese, he knows about Bill Gates, or even about Lady Gaga, but he doesn't know about Hodaxi, who is the one who created the university in Vietnam after the revolution. Where I don't follow you is that I think you go a bit too far. I think I am living here now for 12 years, I am teaching here in physics, not in mathematics. And I think the situation is bad. It is bad for very good reasons, because there have been several lost generations of teachers. It's our fault, you American and I French, if you want, it's our fault that Vietnam is suffering still today, and in my opinion, for many years to come, of this problem. The war looks, today when you go in the street, it looks forgotten, but it is not. I think there are many scars, in particular in university, which will last for decades, many decades still. And I think if we want to help Vietnam, one should not overdo it too much. One should not tell them, you know, these statistics are bad, you're good, and so on. I think it's not true. I think it is a fact that university in Vietnam is bad, in the sense that the country deserves to have a much better university. And I think that and Professor Wang Tui, whom we both admire very much, is the first person to say that he spent his life to express the problems of the university and he fought all his life to improve the situation. I think this is what should be done, and what should not make it too rosy, if you want. There is a lot of corruption, there is a lot of incompetence. There are also now, for the first time, young people who must be given a chance, but there is very little effort to give the young generation a chance. So this is what we have to fight for. We have to denounce that. We have to say the old generation in Vietnam does not give enough chance to the young generation which is coming up now. This is constructive, you see. If we say too much, I mean, again, I am fully, I had read your report, I had read Valé's report. When I had read Valé's report, I thought, that's not, I mean, these people lack decency. If I were, being American, one should be more careful with what one writes. And then I read your report, I said, really somebody who speaks with his heart. But then he's a bit blind to the fact that the situation really is not good. So that's how I see it.
Okay, thank you. I understand your point of view, and I basically agree with what you said. In fact, in my report, I included a list of things that I thought should be done, and I've spoken about that in meetings with people, with officials, and so on. One of the most important things that I think needs to be done, that I talk about on every possibility, is improving the conditions at the universities. That right now, the faculty at Vietnam National University have such low salaries, and they have such bad working conditions. They have no offices, they have no place to meet with students. Their conditions are terrible. And what I've opposed, what I've been against, is spending money on Americans to come here and visit or do something when that money needs to be spent on Vietnamese. That's the point that I've been constantly making, and I make this with officials and so on, that the solution to educational problems has to be a human solution. By importing something from another country, you are not going to accomplish anything. You're going to spend a lot of money and get nothing. And I think that's true, for example, of some of the programs they have now, of the VEF and of the advanced programs. Some parts of those, I'm not saying all of them, but some parts of them are simply spending money foolishly. And that money should be spent to improve conditions of Vietnamese professors at the national universities. And I've said that at every opportunity. I have no illusion that conditions are good at Vietnamese universities. And I know that it is not reasonable to go to a Vietnamese professor at VNU or some other university and say, oh, you should do this, and you should do that, and you should improve this way and that way. Because they are paid so little money, and they have to work at a second job, and they have no place to meet with students. So those things have to be corrected. And I think it's especially important for the Vietnamese officials to understand that the solutions to the problems have to come from Vietnamese people, not imported from the West. And that's why I've opposed programs to spend money in the West, and I've constantly been talking about that. I don't think that the situation is wonderful.
That's exactly what I like to be.
Okay.
This is constructive.
And I've said that many times to many people. I'm not saying that conditions in Vietnam are good right now for people at the universities. Other comments? And please feel free to disagree. You can disagree angrily if you want.